Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to our Chassidishe Parsha Shir, the Monday night Chassidus, learning the Maimorim from the Alter Rebbe from Torah on the weekly Parsha. We're coming towards the end of Sefer Bereshis. We are in the second last Parsha, the Parsha of Vayigash, and we're going to be learning the first Maimer of the Alter Rebbe of Torah on Parshas Vayigash. Just by way of introduction, so the beginning of the Parsha opens with the meeting of Yehudah and Yosef, and this is a follow-on from the end of last week's Parsha. At the end of last week's Parsha, the brothers left, and Yosef had hidden his silver cup in the sack of Binyamin, who the brothers, particularly Yehudah, had sworn to protect. And they were brought back to Mitzrayim, and Yosef said that he is going to keep Binyamin as a slave. And at that point in time, Yehudah can no longer contain himself, and Yehudah approaches Yosef, and he stands up against him, and he pours out his heart, and he says that this young boy, Binyamin, was not actually so young at the time. He was 33 years old, I believe, 36 years old. And he said that he's precious to his father, and his father will not be able to survive if he is taken away. And eventually what happens as a result of Yehudah's words is that Yosef breaks down, and Yosef reveals himself to his brothers, and then we have that famous, powerful reunion. So the beginning of the parsha is about a meeting of Yehudah and Yosef. Yehudah approaches Yosef. Yehudah is not just one of the tribes, he is the king of the tribes. From him would come the Davidic dynasty, the kings of Malchus Beis David. Whereas now Yosef, the tables are turned, and Yosef is officially the shalit, the ruler of the entire Egypt, the most powerful person in the world, and Yehudah is approaching him. And this theme of Yehudah and Yosef, Yehudah approaching Yosef, is also expressed in the Haftarah of this week. The Haftarah of this week is one of the Nevuos of Yechezkel Hanavi, and he is addressing, it's a messianic Haftarah, because whilst for most of the time of Bayis Rishon, the first temple era, there was a split kingdom. The Jewish people were split into 10 tribes up in the north and the 2 southern tribes in the south. The southern kingdom was ruled by Malchus Beis David. That was where the kings from Yehudah ruled, the Davidic dynasty followed by Shlomo HaMelech and then his sons after him. Whereas the northern kingdom was a breakaway, and that was led by Yerovam ben Nevat, who descended from the tribe of Ephraim, a descendant of Yosef. And therefore this split kingdom, whilst there was 10 tribes and 2 tribes, but that too is associated between the power struggle between Yosef and Yehudah, similar to what we find in the Parsha. But Yechezkel says that in the future, in the times of Moshiach, no longer will there be a split in the kingdom, no longer will the Jewish people be divided, but they will be united once again, that Yehudah and Yosef will be united and become as one. And that time, David HaMelech, the Nasi, the king, the ruler of the Jewish people, will be the descendant of David HaMelech, which is, of course, Moshiach ben David, of course, Moshiach. So this is the idea of the Haftarah and the Parsha. It is about a meeting of Yehudah and Yosef and a power struggle. Which of the two is more powerful? Which of the two is more dominant? Chassidus explains this idea on a deeper level, that both Yehudah and Yosef represent far deeper things than just their personalities. And it's related to the various sephiros that they represent. Yosef represents the sephira of Yesod, and Yehudah represents the sephira of Malchus. Now, whilst on the revealed level, Yehudah, Malchus, is lower than Yesod, Malchus is the receiver, it's the sephira which receives the divine energies from the sephiros above it, which would place Malchus lower than all of the other spheres. But Kabbalah explains that in its source, in essence, the source of Malchus is in fact higher than the source of the other midos, and therefore in its source, it is in fact the greater of all of the midos. And this reflects itself in many areas. So for example, Yosef or Yesod represents Talmud, the study of Torah, the understanding of Torah, whereas Malchus, which is Yehudah, represents action, which seems to be the lowest of our expressions. The study of Torah is a spiritual experience. It's enriching, it's engaging, etc. Whereas action seems to be, it's just doing. Animals, lahavdil, and young children without intellect also can act, can also do things. Yet, that is only on the revealed level. In the essence, just as the source of Malchus is higher than all of the other spheres, so too in essence, the maisa of the mitzvahs, the actions of the mitzvahs, are in fact higher than everything else. So that's an introduction to the mimer that we're going to learn. And I'm going to now bring up on the screen the text of the mimer, which is from Torah on this week's Parsha. Please feel free to follow along. So we'll start off in paragraph number 1. Vayigash elav Yehudah vayomer bi Adoni. So this is the opening pasuk of the Parsha. It says that Yehudah approached him. Yehudah approached Yosef, vayomer, and he said, "Bi Adoni, please, my master." This is where Yehudah is interceding on behalf of Binyamin. It says in a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, "Koros beitenu arazim," Koros beitenu, that the walls of our house is made of cedar wood. Now, this, whilst according to some midrashim, some of the Mefarshim refers to the Beis Hamikdash, which is Hamelech. However, the Chassidus brings this pasuk as referring to the Mishkan. The Mishkan, which is, of course, the temporary tabernacle that accompanied the Jewish people in the desert. The koiros, the walls, the beams, literally the koiros means the beams of our house are made of cedar. V'hinei, yesh lahavin ha'hefresh bein hamishkan lebeis elamim, sha'mishkan hayem ma'arazim. We have to understand the difference between the Mishkan, which was the temporary tabernacle, and the Beis Elamim, the eternal house, which refers to the Beis Hamikdash on Har HaBayis, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Mishkan hayem ma'arazim. The bulk of the structure of the Mishkan was made of cedar wood. It was made of plant material. It was made of wood. As the pasuk says, Atze shitim oimdim, that it has trees or wood of shittim, of cedar wood, that are oimdim, standing up. So the walls were made of wood in the Mishkan, and the roof, the cover of the structure, was made out of curtains. And these curtains were made out of various animal skins. So you had, for example, the Urios Izim, which was made out of goat's hair. You had the Oiros Elim, you had the skins of the rams, Oiros Techashim, and of course you also had the colorful woolen curtains which covered the Mishkan as well. So that's the Mishkan. The Mishkan, the walls were made of wood, the coverings were made of animal material, of animal skins. Beis Hamikdash, but in contrast, the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, Hayem Ma'avanim va'afar Dafka. The Beis Hamikdash was built out of stones and out of afar, dirt, specifically, not just by default, but rather, like the Alter Rebbe quotes from the Rambam, She'asur lasois boi eitz boilet v'achsadrois shel eitz k'may shekatsav Rambam perik aleph meuchus beis bechira v'ayim b'sefer achinuch mitzvah taf tzadik beis. The Rambam writes that in the Beis Hamikdash it was forbidden. The Torah says, "Lo yisita lecha asherah kol eitz." You are not allowed to plant a tree next to the mizbeach, and from this Chazal learned that one is not allowed to use any wood that is revealed, any wood that protrudes in the construction of the Beis Hamikdash. And that's why the Beis Hamikdash, the walls, the roof, the floor, was all made out of stone. There were only a few beams. In one place, there were beams of cedar wood in order to support the roof of the ulam, the roof structure of the antechamber to the Beis Hamikdash. So that's the difference between the two. The Tzarech Lahavin in paragraph 2 says, Alter Rebbe, we have to understand Tzarech Lahavin zeh. Mimnei ma b'mishkan hayu arazim iker b'binyan, ba'afar hayu rak b'karka mishkan lamata. Why is it so different? We know that the Mishkan was a prototype, a forerunner for the Beis Hamikdash. So why is it that the Mishkan, its primary structure, was made out of cedar wood, and the afar, the earth, was only the base? It was only the floor of the Mishkan. The Mishkan did not have a specific floor. Wherever they camped, that became the floor of the Mishkan. So whereas in the Mishkan, the primary part of its construction was wood, the Mikdash was the opposite. That the main part of the structure of the Beis Hamikdash was of stone and was of dirt. Even the roof, was made out of stone. And there was no wood in the Beis Hamikdash at all, aside from these beams which were there used as support structures, and therefore they were really tuffled, they were secondary to the actual binyan. So we need to understand, why is it the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash were so different in the materials that they had to be constructed with? So in paragraph 3, the Alter Rebbe continues, It's brought down in the works of Jewish philosophy that all of the things which exist within our world fall into one of four groupings. There is the doimem, which is the inanimate, the mineral world, the tzomeach, which means the plant, the vegetative world. There is the chai, the animal world, and finally, then you have the medaber. Medaber means the speaker. That refers to man. And the Alter Rebbe says that these four levels exist not just in our physical world, but in each of the spiritual worlds as well. They have a counterpart in these four stratas of existence. Doimem, the inanimate, which would include rock, stone, dust, etc. Tzomeach, anything coming from plants, which would include wood. Chai, animals. And then finally, the medaber, the man. And these form a hierarchy, that the highest level order of creation is the medaber, is man. Below man is the animal, which is a living, moving being, but not on the level of man, lacks the intellect. Below that, we have the tzomeach, the plant. And then finally, we have the lowest level of creation is the inanimate world, the doimem. And the greatest of all of these levels, who bechinas medaber, is man. And therefore it's strange. But then we have a question, that if that is true, that the earth, the inanimate, is the lowest of the orders of creation, why do we find a specific power invested within the earth that the earth can make things grow? That the tzomeach, the plant, which is a higher order of creation seemingly, but it grows from the power, the energy that is there within the earth. So what seems to be the lowest, which is the earth, the inanimate, is not necessarily so. In paragraph 4, the Alter Rebbe says, this is a phraseology which we find in the Gemara, that the nature of this is not like the nature of that. That we have to look a little bit deeper. Even though it's true, on the revealed level, when we rank the order of creation, the doimem, the inanimate, the mineral world, is on a lower plane than the plant world. Nonetheless, we know in Chassidus, everything that exists in our world has a spiritual source in the godly worlds. And whilst on the revealed level, it appears that the inanimate is the lowest level within creation, but it has within it a certain quality that it can make things grow, and that quality comes from the source of the inanimate, which is higher than the source of the animal and plant world. Now, this is a concept which comes up a lot in Chassidus, is that whatever falls or whatever descends to a lower level is because, or is a sign that in its source, it actually comes from a higher level. And there are a few mashalim which are given for these parables. One is if you imagine a stone wall, and that stone wall is pushed over, the stones which fall furthest away were in fact the stones which were higher up on the wall. The highest stones fall further away. And so too, that which falls lower, that which appears to be lower within our world context, is a sign that in its spiritual source, in fact, it comes from a higher level. There's a famous argument of the Tanoim, of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, the great two scholars of Hillel and Shammai, their academies, and they had the following argument: which was created first, the heavens or the earth? Chad Amar, one of them says, Shamayim kadmu la'aretz, that the heavens preceded the earth, and they bring support from the pasuk Moshiach Kasuf, Bereshis bara Elokim, es hashamayim ve'es ha'aretz, that in the beginning Hashem created the heavens and the earth. So from this pasuk, we see that the heavens were created, preceded the creation of the earth. The Chad Amar, but the other, the disputant says, Eretz Kadma, that the earth was created first. Moshiach Kasuf, as it says a little bit further on in Parshas Bereshis, V'yoyim asois Hashem Elikim Eretz v'shamayim. On the day that Hashem made Eretz, the earth, v'shamayim, and the heavens. So what do we see from this pasuk? That the earth preceded the heavens. Now you're going to say that these two psukim are contradictory. The first pasuk indicates that the heavens, which represents the spiritual worlds, preceded the creation of the earth, which is the physical world. The other pasuk seems to suggest that the physical world, the earth, preceded the creation of the heavens. Says the Alter Rebbe, ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Both these and those are the words of the living God. What does that mean? It means that both opinions are correct. Both opinions are true, but they are discussing different levels of reality. Shebemachshava eretz kadma l'shamayim, ukshebara hashamayim tchila. Then in Hashem's machshava, in Hashem's thought, in Hashem's intention for creation, on that level, eretz kadma l'shamayim, on that level, the earth, the world, the physical world preceded the heavens. In Hashem's thought, Hashem's first initial thought was for this physical world, and only afterwards for the creation of the spiritual worlds. But when it came to the actual bria, when it came to the actual creation of these worlds, then Hashamayim Tchila, the heavens, the spiritual worlds were created first, and only the lower world, our physical world, was created subsequently. Now, why is that? The Indian in paragraph 5, the Alter Rebbe says, Ki soif maisa b'machshava tchila. We say this in our Chadoidi prayer on Friday nights. Soif maisa b'machshava tchila. The end action, the final action, was b'machshava tchila, was first in Hashem's thought. The whatever arose in Hashem's thought, that is the final thing to be made, to be created. Pirush. And therefore, based on this principle, just to illustrate with an example, the person has an idea. Now it's a good one, right? All those people were planning on going on holiday and everything's been changed at the moment, but you have a machshava, you have a thought of going on holiday. And what do you imagine when you see yourself going on holiday? You picture yourself at your destination, having a good, relaxful time, whatever that may be for each individual, if it's a swimming pool, if it's a beach, if it's hiking, whatever that is. Now, in order to get to that, you need to do a lot of things. You need to make accommodation arrangements, you need to book tickets, you need to pack a bag, you need to make plans, and only at the end of all of that do you eventually get to the destination. But what was the initial machshava? The initial machshava was the relaxation in that destination. That's the soif maisa. That's what you will achieve at the end. But that is the initial thought. And so too over here. When Hashem created the world, the earth, the physical world, the fact that it is the soif maisa, the fact that it's the lowest rung within Seder Ishtalshus, the fact that it was the last to be created in actuality, our Karchach forces us to conclude that in its source, that was Hashem's initial thought. That means the higher level within Hashem's thought of creation was for the physical earth, the world, and that's why it was the last to be created. But when it comes to the heaven, which represents the spiritual worlds, that was the beginning of creation, because creation started with the spiritual worlds. But in Hashem's thought, you must say that they were the afterthought. They were secondary. They came later in Hashem's thought. This is the rule. That it's the end action, the final deed, which arises first within the thought. And therefore, if we put this into context of the four orders of creation, Medaber, man, Chai, the animal, Tzomeach, the vegetation, and then finally the Doimim, the fact that the Doimim, the inanimate, is the last and the lowest in actual creation, actually signifies that it comes from a deeper source within Hashem's thought. And therefore, Hatzomeach l'mayla mahadoimim, v'chein hachai l'mayla mahatzomeach. Therefore, in the actual creation, the tzomeach, the plant, is higher than the inanimate, and the animal level, the animal sphere, is above, higher than the plant world. Shezeu kafi seder ishtalshlus doimim tzomeach chai medaber ba'olamis. Shebechinas hadoimim va'afar haaretz ubechinas soif maisa v'tzomeach v'chai l'mala mimenu b'madrega. So therefore, when we look at existence in the prism of Seder Ishtalshelus, in the evolvement of the worlds, in the actual creation of the world, which goes from higher to lower, on that level, the animal, the chai, is higher than the tzomeach, the plant, and the plant is higher than the inanimate. So that's within the context of Seder Ishtalshelus. V'hu inyan shamayim kadmul aretz, and that is like the opinion which says that the heavens preceded the earth, that in actual creation, the spiritual world came before the physical world. So too, the creation of the higher order of creations, that preceded the, that is higher than, not that it preceded in creation, but it's higher than the inanimate. Umikom makom, mitzad shorshen b'machshava hakduma. But that's how it was actually created. That's how it is in the revealed way. But when we look at the source, when we look at the way these things exist within Hashem's machshava, Hashem's thought for creation, his machshava akduma hare eretz dafka kadma lekulam b'machshava. It's the lowest, the soif ma'isa that was b'machshava tchila. And therefore, what we think as being the lowest is in fact in its source the highest. And therefore, the daimim, the inanimate, in fact, is greater, is higher, and that's why we find this specific quality hidden within the earth, the power to make things grow, because the source of the inanimate, in fact, comes from a higher place within Hashem's thought, within the godly reality. Chapter 6. And that is why the earth has the koyach and the ability to make things grow. And that's another reason why, ultimately, all of the other areas of existence, man, animals, plants, are all reliant and dependent on the earth, and we all receive our sustenance from the earth. It says in the Pasuk, Melech l'sadeh nevad, even the king is subservient to the field, because man and animals need to eat. Man will eat from the animal world as well as from the plant world, which includes grain and produce. Animals will eat from the plant world. And where does that receive its nourishment from? What causes plants to grow? It grows from the earth. So ultimately, we all receive our sustenance from the earth. The Mishkan loya nimtza adayin tachlis Hashem. So now with this understanding, we can understand the difference between the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Alter Rebbe, the Mishkan was only temporary. And why is that? Because at that point in time, they had not yet reached the Tachlis HaShleimus, Shayarak Diras Arai Shel HaKadosh Baruch. Both the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash was a dwelling place for Hashem's presence. But there was a difference between the level of godly presence within the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash. Since the Mishkan was only temporary, as it says, Hashem said that I will travel within a tent within the Mishkan. Therefore, in the Mishkan, the level of godliness that was manifest was the level of godliness which is shaykh to Seder Ishtalshos, which is within the context of creation. And that is how the world was actually created, and on that level, the spiritual preceded the physical, the heavens preceded the earth. And therefore, because the Mishkan represents godliness within context of Seder Ishtalshus, we can now understand how it was constructed. And that's why the walls of the Mishkan were made out of beams of wood, which come from the vegetation level of existence. And the earth, which is the lowest level, that was made from the inanimate, that was the dust of the earth. So the actual construction of the Mishkan itself parallels Seder Ishtalshus, that the primary construction was made of wood, and that wood sits above the inanimate, because within the context of creation, the plant world is higher than the inanimate world. And that's why it was specifically cedar wood, because cedar trees grow very, very tall, which brings out how the cedar trees, the wood of the Mishkan, is superior to the inanimate, which was on the floor. And then we have the covering over the Mishkan. Came from animal material, from the hairs and skins of various animals. And within the order of hierarchy of creation, the animal world sits above, is higher than the plant world. And that's why these coverings, which were makif, they surrounded, they encompassed the Mishkan, were higher in order than the walls, and therefore they came from the animal world. Nimtza. Therefore, what do we see? Shekol ze nasa kvi seder mailas umadreges ishtalshlus v'ishtalshlusun ubriyusun milmaila lamatush u'bechinish shamayim kadmuchu. The Mishkan itself follows the order of seder ishtalshlus from above to below. On its highest level, we have the animal world. Then we have the walls of the Mishkan, which is the vegetation world. Then at the bottom, we have the dust of the earth, which is the inanimate world. So that is the Mishkan. And now we can understand why it was constructed in that way. But what about the Beis Hamikdash? In paragraph 9, whereas the Mishkan was only temporary, where the Mishkan was only a level of godliness which is within the framework of Seder Ishtalshlus, the Beis Hamikdash itself was the Tachlis Hashemus. That was the ultimate and absolute revelation of godliness, the way godliness transcends Ishtalshlus, transcends existence. Because the Beis Hamikdash was the permanent fixed dwelling place of Hashem. As it says in the Pasuk, this is my resting place forever. And therefore, and therefore the revelation of godliness within the Beis Hamikdash was similar to the revelation that will be in Olam Haba, which is a reference to the times of Moshiach and specifically to the times of Tchias HaMesim, that which will be in the 7th millennium, which will be a time which is entirely like Shabbos, which is the ultimate rest within the world. So the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim was a place where godliness, on the same level as Moshiach, godliness which is entirely beyond the world, was openly manifest and revealed. So Kabbalah explains as follows. Whilst now, within the context of Seder Ishtalshlus, Malchus, which is the receiver of all of the godly energies, is the lowest of all of the spheres within Atzilus, Malchus, which represents the feminine energy, the receiver, and nowadays the receiver is below the giver, representing how Malchus is below the other spheres. But in the times of Moshiach, there will be the elevation of Malchus, and then Malchus will be higher, elevated to higher than the masculine spheres, all of the other middos. As Chassidus brings the pasuk, Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila. And Eishes Chayil, a woman of valor, is a crown to her husband. And here, according to Kabbalah, the husband, the male, represents the male energies of the middos, and the Eishes Chayil is the sphere of Malchus. And in the future, Eishes Chayil, the sphere of Malchus, will be elevated to become a crown that adorns and sits above, higher than the masculine energies. Then Malchus will be revealed how in its source it is in fact higher than all of the other spheres. So if that is true in the times of Moshiach, and the Beis Hamikdash is a embodiment of the level of godliness that will pervade the world and reality in the times of Moshiach, then that element of Malchus being above all of the other spheres must be present as well. We mentioned before that whatever appears lowest within the context of creation, in fact, in its source in Hashem's thought, is higher than all of the others. And that was the uniqueness of the earth. And that's what it means in the future, Malchus, which is parallel to the earth. The plant world is connected to the masculine spheres. Malchus is connected to the inanimate world, to the doimem. And in times of Moshiach, the source of the inanimate will be revealed and how it is higher than all of the other orders of creation, just as Malchus will be revealed how it is higher than all of the other spheres. And therefore, says the Alter Rebbe, Lachein, Af beBeis Hamikdash, Shahayim Me'ein Olam Haba, and that is why in the Beis Hamikdash, which was a resemblance, a taste, a forerunner to Olam Haba, the times of Moshiach, Nasa Ikar Abayis Ma'avanim Va'afar Sheheim B'chinis Doimem. That is why the Beis Hamikdash was made entirely out of stone and earth, coming from the inanimate. She'af Hagagu Ma'aziva, that even the earth, the roof and the ceiling, Shehi B'chinis HaMakif, which is the highest level of the Mishkan, Nasa Ma'avanim Va'afar, was made out of stones and dust, V'loi Ma'arazim, and not out of cedar wood. Because the Beis Hamikdash mirrored how things will be in the times of Moshiach, and on that level, where the source, the way things are in Hashem's machshava, will be revealed, on that level, Eretz Kadma, the earth comes before the heavens, Eishes Chal Ateres Baila, that the feminine, the attribute of Malchus, and therefore by extension, the inanimate will be a crown, will be elevated mitzad shorsha because of its source to the highest of levels. Rak sheklon soishal eres sheyeh ba'atikra heim hayim bechinas tamchen levad leikra atikra nasa bechinas doimem ukeinian tamchen doiraisa. The Alter Rebbe just addresses that these beams of wood which will be there as support structures, but because they are just support, they are really considered as being tafel, something secondary. They're only there as support. So with this, we can actually understand now the difference between the construction of the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash. Because the Mishkan represents godliness within the context of Seder Ishtalshalos, its construction parallels the order of existence within Seder Ishtalshalos. You have the animal skins above the wooden walls, above the inanimate floor. Whereas the Beis Hamikdash, which was built to mirror how things are in their source that will be revealed in the times of Moshiach, on that level, the inanimate, which is reflective of the sphere of Malchus, will be primary. That will be the ultimate, and therefore the Beis Hamikdash was constructed entirely out of stone. Okay, the Alter Rebbe now says, "V'hinei nira ba'alel." We see this clearly. Gamkein b'china zu sheyesh ba'aretz ma'ile yeseder. We see another dimension of this quality within the earth, in the inanimate. Not only that has the possibility and ability to make things grow, but another element will bechinas habitul sheyesh ba shemedras tachas kapos raglei hakol, that we find within the earth a quality of bittul, a quality of humility that everybody tramples over the earth. Whereas when it comes to the plant world, specifically when we talk about tall trees and the like, no one tramples over it, and therefore the quality of humility, of bittul, of anava, is reflected by the earth. And we say this in our prayers, V'nashi ka'afar, let my soul be humble like dust. Avraham Avinu said, Anochi afar va'efer. So we have this idea of bittul, which is expressed humility specifically in the earth, in the inanimate. And where does this quality of bittul within the inanimate come from? It too comes from the lofty source of the inanimate, the way it exists within Hashem's thoughts as the initial thought. Because if we look at the word machshava, is cheshev ma. Machshava is divided up in two words. Chashav means to think. Ma means what? What is it? Ma represents the idea of bittul. Shutachlis habitul k'moshe amar Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom v'nachnu ma. Just as Moshe, who was the most humble of all men, said, v'nachnu ma. What are we? We are nobody. We are nothing. So ma represents bittul. So machshava represents bittul because it's connected to the highest levels of godliness. Umisham nimshach umisabish b'chinis habitul baret. And that's why even though now the earth is the lowest strata of existence, but nonetheless within the earth we see this quality, this godly quality of bittul. By that, it is because of this bittul, because of this humility and surrender, that it will be elevated to be higher than all of the other spheros. And that is another reason why the Beis Hamikdash was made out of stone. So let's move on. We'll skip the brackets and move to paragraph 12. So that's the Beis Hamikdash, whereas the Mishkan, which was built according to mirror, to parallel Seder Ishtalshalos, the way it is now, not the way it will be revealed in the future when the source of everything will be apparent. And now the plant world is higher than the inanimate. Shamayim kadmu, the heavens, the spiritual precedes the earth. That is why the Beis Hamikdash was built in such a way that the walls, the primary structure, was made out of the plant world, and the lowest was from the earth. So how does all of this relate to the Parsha? The Alter Rebbe now brings us back to the Parsha to explain that all of this discussion of the plant and the inanimate and what appears lower is in fact higher in its source. These are embodied within the two personalities who are the main characters in both the Parsha and the Haftarah, at the beginning of the Parsha at least, of Yehudah and Yosef. V'hinei, in paragraph 13, Zehu gamkein inyan Yosef Yehudah. All of this which we've discussed, which is the difference between the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash, the plant and the inanimate, Malchus and Zah, this is the difference between Yosef and Yehudah. Shu gamkein b'b'chinas u'madregas shamayim va'aretz u'b'chinas soimeach v'doimem. Yehudah and Yosef also represent the heavens and the earth. Yosef represents the heavens, the spiritual worlds. Yehudah represents the earth. Yosef represents the tzomech, the plant world. Yehudah represents the doimem. Yosef represents the masculine energies, the midos of Atzilus. Yehudah represents the spirit of Malchus. Ki Yosef loshen Tosefes. The word Yosef means Tosefes, to increase, to add. When Yosef was given the name, Hashem, the name, his father said, Yosef Hashem li ben acher. Rachel said, actually, let Hashem add for me another child, increase. So Yosef means to grow. Tosefes v'ribui. Shemitoisef v'hoylech v'agdala v'agbal l'mayla. And this idea of growing is reflected in plants. The earth, the inanimate, does not grow. It does not change. The tzomeach, the plant world, grows. Ubefrat, specifically, when we look at the Beis Hamikdash, bechinas ha'erez, which is made out of cedar wood, shegado v'hoylech l'mayla mayla bruma mayla. So it grows to the highest of levels. So Chumash Shekasav, it says in Tehillim, tzadik katamar yifrach ke'erez bavanon yiskeh, that the tzadik will flower like a date palm, and like the cedars of Lebanon, they will rise up. So Yosef is connected to the idea of the tzomech, the plant life, which is the idea of growing and increasing. That is Yosef. The Alter Rebbe explains, and I'll say this outside, in terms of spiros, Yosef represents the spirits of Zad Atzilus, which is the emotions. Our emotions also grow. Emotions can be small, but emotions can grow from being small. A person's a little bit upset, and over time that becomes a raging anger or pain. A person can make our emotions of love, fear, whatever it is, emotions grow. They never stay static. They're always in flux. Whereas Malchus represents the doimem. Malchus is connected to the inanimate, and that is connected to action. Action is very finite. Action is very limited. It does not change. Once it's done, it does not change. Whereas emotions can change. And therefore, emotions are like the plant. In fact, Chassidus explains that the tzomech within us, the vegetative world within us, is our emotions, whereas our actions, that is considered as malchus. Now, on one level, we would think that our emotions are superior to our actions because it's a deeper feeling. However, in its source, action is incredibly powerful. So now let's move to 15. So Yosef is connected to the plant world. Yosef, idea of growing. Whereas the Yehudah, who bechinas eretz, Malchus Datzilus, Shehi bechinas hadoimim Datzilus. In contrast, Yehudah represents the earth. Yosef represents the heavens, the spiritual worlds. Yehudah represents the physical earth, the world. Malchus Datzilus, which in spirits corresponds to the lowest of the spirits, Malchus, and in the orders of creation, that is the doimim, the inanimate. And that's why the name Yehudah, when Leah named Yehudah, she said, Hapam oide es havaya. Now I will acknowledge, thanks or acknowledge Hashem. The word hoidah means to surrender. To surrender oneself to Hashem is an expression of bittul. And we mentioned before that the earth has this quality of bittul, that everyone tramples over it. And so to Yehudah, which his name embodies this idea of bittul, corresponds to the doimem, the inanimate. Yesh bo bechinas bittul beyoser, and that's why the doimem, the inanimate, has the idea of bittul. So with this paradigm, Yosef represents the midos, Yehudah represents malchus. Yosef represents the spiritual world, Yehudah represents the physical world. Yosef represents the tzomech, the plant world, and Yehudah represents the inanimate. Like in the Mishkan, the Seder Ishtalshus, when we look at, therefore, the relationship of Yehudah and Yosef within Seder Ishtalshus, we're in paragraph 16. Ata Yosef ulamayla mi Yehudah. Now, within the paradigm of Seder Ishtalshus, just as the plant life is higher than the earth, just as Zah, the masculine spirits, are higher than Malchus, so too now Yosef is higher than Yehudah. Because now, within Seder Ishtalshus, Malchus, as the receiver, receives its vitality, receives its flow of godliness from the masculine spirits, the masculine midos. And that is why Yosef, of all the brothers, was the most powerful. He was the melech b'Mitzrayim. He was the king over Egypt. Which is like the plants. Gidol, growing, powerful and tall and mighty. And he was the one who sustained and supported everyone. The Yehudah who are Makabel, Yehudah, who represents the 12 tribes in general. Yehudah is like Malchus, the Makabel, the receiver of Yosef's benevolence. And that's why in the Parsha it says, Vayigash elav Yehudah vayomer bi Adoni. That Yehudah approached Yosef and he said, Bi Adoni, Bi Adoni. Bi can mean please, please my master. But the word be means into me. Be Adoni, says the Alter Rebbe, Pirush Shabo Yumshach Hashefa Mi Yosef Atzadik. That Yehudah, who represents Malchus, is asking, be Adoni, Yosef, the emotional spirits of Zah, a masculine spirits and godly energies, come into me. Because nowadays Malchus receives from Yosef, from the spirit of Yesod. So that Malchus should receive Hashefa Mi Yosef Atzadik. Ukamuvur B'Zoyar, the Vayigash Hainu Tikrufta Alma Ba'alma. The Zohar says that this approach of Yehudah to Yosef is the approach of one world to the next. Dainu Alma Tata, the lower world, Bechinis Malchus, Misyachedes V'nigeshes Legabe Alma Elah, approaches and connects to the upper world, which is Zah, the masculine spirits, Lekabel Hashefa, in order to receive the flow. But Malchus is the receiver. Malchus is lower. Yosef is the powerful ruler and the king. Yehudah is subservient to him. And therefore, this union of Yehudah and Yosef in the Parsha is like the Mishkan, which paralleled Chassidishe, that the walls, the primary structure was the Tzemach, Yosef was more powerful, and Yehudah was the receiver, Yehudah was lower. Asid Lava in paragraph 17. But Asid Lava in the times of Moshiach, Yis'ala Yehudah liyos l'mayla mevchinas Yosef. In the times of Moshiach, Yehudah will be elevated higher than Yosef. Just as we said before, the sphere of Malchus will be elevated above all of the other spheres, as it says, Eishes Chala Teres Baila, that the woman of valor, the feminine energy of Malchus, will be elevated to become the crown even above the masculine energies. Mitzad Shorsha, because of the source, Sha'ala b'machshava tchila kanal, because even though Malchus is the lowest now, even though Yehudah is lower now, but in its source, the way it was in Hashem's thought, that was the machshava tchila. What is cheshev ma? What is machshava? What is ma bittul? Bittul is also connected not just to Malchus, but beyond that, bittul is also associated with the highest, the loftiest of all spheres, which is the spirit of chachma, in which Hashem's essential light, the Or Ein Sof, resides. And therefore, is this deep connection between Malchus and chachma. So, in terms of the actual creation, the way things are within Seder Ishtalshalos, Malchus is lower than the other spheres. But Malchus in its source comes from Chachma and beyond, from the level of Keser, which will be revealed in the times of Moshiach, because they both have this quality of bittul. V'hine Abba Yosef Barta, the Zohar says that Abba Chachma, the father, is what founds and establishes the daughter, which is Malchus. Ki Chachma Elah Nikra Yira Elah, v'Chachma Tata Shi Malchus Hi Yira Tata. There's a connection between Chachma and Malchus. Both of them represent the idea of bittul and Yira. And therefore, in its deeper source, that is the source of Malchus, and therefore, on a deeper level, Malchus transcends all of the other spheres. Jumping down to paragraph 18. In fact, let's jump down to the next paragraph, 19, because I'm wary of the time. And now we can understand as follows. Whereas in the Parsha which represents the paradigm of Seder Ishtalshalos, Yosef, the emotions, Yosef, the plant world, is higher than Yehudah, and Yehudah must surrender himself to Yosef. But the Haftarah, which is a messianic Haftarah, is a Haftarah describing the way things will be in the times of Moshiach, when the source of everything will be revealed. The Parshas Vayigash, many of the prophecies, the Nevi'im were told to use props to illustrate the content of the Nevuah, the prophecy. Yechezkel was told, take an eitzechad, take a piece of wood and write Yehudah on it. And take another piece of wood and write upon it Yosef. Yosef Ephraim, which we said before, this represents the two split kingdoms. The kingdom of Yosef of Ephraim in the north and Yehudah in the south. And to show how in the future they will no longer be split and they will once again be united, bring them close one to the other, and they will become one in your hand. Hashem says, I will bring the tree of Yosef, which is the northern kingdom, and I will bring together with it the wood of Yehudah, which represents the southern kingdom, until finally the pasuk says that my servant David, which refers to Moshiach, the descendant of King David, will be the king over both of them. So what does this mean? This means that in the times of Moshiach, there'll be a united kingdom, but who will be the king? Whereas now, in the split kingdom, the majority of the tribes follow the king of Yosef in the north, 10 out of 12. But in the times of Moshiach, the kingdom will come from Yehudah. The king over all the Jewish people will once again be from the Davidic line. In paragraph 20, Pirush, Ki ata Yosef hu l'maylam Yehudah, because now, in terms of Seder Ishtalshus, which is the godliness which is apparent before Moshiach comes, now Yosef is higher than Yehudah, like in the beginning of the Parsha. As we've said, that Yosef is likened to the cedar tree, which grows high and high. Which is why in the split kingdom, the majority of the tribes, 10 out of 12, followed the kingdom of Yosef. And that's why Yosef had more tribes following him than Yehudah. And that is why he's called Yosef, the idea of increasing, which is connected to Das Elyon. But in the times of Moshiach, when once again Yehudah and Yosef, the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes, will be reunited in an absolute union, an absolute true deep connection. As it says, Vayigash elav Yehudah uchmoshe kasav echad be'echad yigashu. Each one will approach the other. In the true reconciliation and the true joining together and uniting of Yehudah and Yosef will be in the times of Moshiach. So then, just as in the times of Moshiach, the source of everything will be revealed, and the source of the inanimate, the source of Malchus, like in the Beis Hamikdash, which was made out of the inanimate, will be revealed. Therefore, then, as Yis'ala Yehudah l'mayla mi Yosef, then the source of Yehudah, which is Malchus, will be revealed, and then Yehudah will be higher than Yosef. Now, our pasuk based on the pasuk Eshes Chala Teres Baila, that a woman of valor, the spirit of Malchus, will be a crown to the husband, to the other spirits. That is why the king then will come from the tribe of Yehudah, representing the ascension of Yehudah, the ascension of Malchus above all of the others. Coming back to the Parsha, obviously, if this is the idea of the Haftarah, which is messianic, and we'll see in the Haftarah how Yehudah is in fact greater than Yosef, the ultimate king Moshiach will be from Yehudah, because the source of Yehudah, the source of the inanimate, the source of Malchus will be revealed. But there must be an allusion to this in the Parsha as well. So it says the Alter Rebbe, Yosef lehisapek chulu v'isvada Yosef el echav. And this is what it means, that Yosef was no longer able to hold himself back, v'isvada, when he met together with his brothers. The Hainu, shenischabru Yosef Yehudah betachlis hachibur vayichud l'meve echad be'echad, which is a similar idea to the Haftarah, that at that moment, Yosef rejoined his brothers. And that is the allusion to the times of Moshiach, where there will also be this reunion and oneness of the brothers. Elsewhere, Chassidus explains that what triggered this within Yosef. What was it that was the catalyst for Yosef breaking down and reuniting with his brothers, revealing to them who he was? It was Yehudah's words. From that inner source of Yehudah, from Malchus, that is what was able to trigger Yosef in such a way. Now let's move on to paragraph 23, which is fascinating. Uvechola now says the Alter Rebbe, based on all of this, Yuvan v'yuvur mashekosov lekutei ashas ma'arizal. We can understand the teaching from the Arizal on the Gemara. It says in this following account is told over in the story of in Gemara in Sanhedrin in the chapter Chelek Daf Kuf Beis Soif Amud Aleph. And the Gemara over there is discussing various individuals who do not have a share in the world to come. And one of them is Yerovam ben Nevat. Yerovam ben Nevat, who was the king who led the breakaway of the 10 tribes. In fact, it wasn't just a breakaway, but it was with Hashem's Nevuah. Shlomo HaMelech had been considered to have sinned. And therefore, after his demise, the kingdom was split and 10 tribes were given to the northern kingdom to follow Yerovam ben Nevat, who came from the tribe of Ephraim. And it's told that because of his sins, Yerovam set up 2 golden calves in Dan and Beis El, and he led people astray, and he represents the ultimate of evil and idolatry amongst the Jewish people. And we said that he has no share in the world to come. The Gemara says as follows: Shetafsu HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yerovam ben Nevat. Hashem grabbed Yerovam ben Nevat. But Amar lo, and he said to him, Chazor b'cha, return, do tshuva. And then the Gemara continues, and if you do tshuva, ani va'ato ben Yishai, you and I, and the son of Yishai, who of course is David HaMelech, will stroll together in Gan Eden forever. You'll be redeemed. Amalei, so what did Yerovam say? Mi Barosh. Who will be at the head? Who's going to go ahead? Me or David HaMelech? Amalei Hashem said, Ben Yishai Barosh, Ben Yishai, David HaMelech will go at the head. Amalei Tzurivam Ben Nevat said to Hashem, Ihachi Loi Ba'ina, if that is the case, that David will be at the forefront, then I do not want this. I don't want to be involved in this. And of course, he was then relegated to purgatory and has no share in the world to come. Says the Arizal, Shumamisha Inyan Hanal, that this idea, again, David represents Yehudah, which is Malchus. Yerovam ben Nevat comes from Yosef, represents Zah, the masculine energies. And therefore, this interaction really reflects everything that was spoken about. Shakadosh Baruch Hu Ratza Shiravam Yachzor B'Tshuva. Hashem wanted Yerovam ben Nevat to do tshuva. And then he would be elevated to the messianic level, as it's described in the Haftarah of Yosef. This Eitz Ephraim, the tree of Ephraim, which is Yerovam ben Nevat, would be representative of Yosef. And that's what it means. Ani va'ato ben Yishai in the tile began Eden. That you, Hashem says, if you do tshuva, you and I and David HaMelech will stroll in Gan Eden together. What does that mean? That there will be this powerful godly revelation on all of us. Ani. What is ani? I refers to the pronoun I refers to Hashem's very essence. Amalei, but Yerovam ben Nevat said, Mi Barosh, who will go first? Because Yerovam ben Nevat was stuck in the mindset of Seder Ishtalshus, the way things are now, that Yosef is higher than Yehudah, that 10 tribes followed him and only 2 tribes followed David HaMelech. And therefore he was quite happy the way things were, that Yosef, the masculine energies, was superior to Yehudah, was superior to Malchus. And therefore he didn't want that status quo to change. That's why he wanted to be at the forefront. But Hashem said to him, no. That paradigm, that you, Yosef, are higher than Yehudah, that is only now during the time of Galus. But in La'asid Lava, in the times of Moshiach, Yis'ala Yehudah, Malchus, the spirit of Malchus embodied by Yehudah, will be elevated. Lachaim ben Yishai Barash, and that's why Ben Yishai, David HaMelech, will be at the head. Malchus will be elevated above all the other spheres. Amalei and Yerovam ben Nevat said, Ihachi loy ba'in, if so, I do not want this. Because whereas Malchus, which is David, which is Yehudah, has bittul, Yosef, which is the tall cedar tree, lacks that bittul, and therefore Yerovam ben Nevat could not humble and surrender himself to let Yehudah, to let David HaMelech go before him. And based on this, Chazal say, Gasus Haruach Shiravam ben Tardasoi Chulu, that it was the arrogance of Yerovam ben Nevat that drove him away from the world. And we relate this back to regards to the Meraglim. But the final line about Yosef at Tzadik Yehudah Yischaber Lasid Lava B'Tachlis Hayichel Mebe Echa Be'echa. Whilst Yerovam ben Nevat missed that opportunity, nonetheless, as the Haftarah says, that in the future there will once again be this reunion of Yosef at Tzadik and Yehudah, of Malchus and Zah, of the Tzomeach, the plant world, and the inanimate. And at that time they will be one, but the king over all of them will be Moshiach. We'll see the elevation of the sphere of Malchus. We'll see the elevation of humility. We'll see the elevation of action above everything else. And it should happen b'mheira v'yameinu. Amen.
Right, Rabbi Johnson.
You're over there. Thank you for joining us.
Rabbi Johnson, Miri Malthouse. Fascinating.
And next week, Be'ezus Hashem, we've been on quite a journey. We're coming to the last Parsha. We started at Bereshis. We're coming to the last Parsha of Chumash Bereshis, Parshas Vayechi. Join us again next week, 8:30 p.m. for our Monday night Chassidishe share.
Rabbi Johnson,
I'm really sorry. Maybe we can.
What was the actual sikha, to quote it? What was the actual Alter Rebbe's?
It's Torah, or the first Maimer in Vayigash.